right. I would like for you to take a second to look at the disclaimer. This is a disclaimer stating that Ashford University's certificate and degree does not lead to immediate teacher licensure in any state. So I'm going to give you just a second to read up on that. And the next disclaimer states that Ashford University is not responsible for any other links or websites that are outside of the institution. And Dr. Lopez, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let's go. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me here. As Tisha said, I've been in the field for over 20 years. I started as a student preschool teacher in the 3-year-old classroom, and I really never left preschool, so to speak. It's a passion of mine to work with unique populations. So my specialty is families affected by HIV and AIDS, homeless families, veteran families, and adolescent mothers. But additionally, I love dual language learning, and especially in our society, our increasingly global society, we are working with children who are dual language learners. And it's going to be key, if not already, to becoming a quality early educator. And I wanted to share just a little bit about my own experience. When I was a little girl, my grandmother, she never liked us to speak Spanish in the house. And it wasn't until not just a little while ago, maybe about 15 years ago, she finally told us all why. And it was because when she was a little girl in California in the early 20s, and she went to school, the teacher would put tape on her mouth every time that she spoke Spanish. And so she was afraid that that was what would happen to us. So it was really important to her that we only spoke English, although most of us ended up acquiring a second language, thank goodness. But it was something that she went through, and it was very common at the time. And so I'm just very grateful to be in a time frame where teachers get to embrace dual language learners. We get to challenge ourselves, and we get to work with this wonderful population. So, oh, and I just wanted to point out on this slide, just a reminder is our ethical responsibility to dual language learners. Here's the reminder via the NAYC diversity statement. And I just wanted to point out this bold part, which is each child's way of learning a new language should be viewed as acceptable, logical, and part of the ongoing development and learning of any new language. And with that, go ahead and keep in mind, we're going to be reviewing some strategies here, but let's remember that dual language learners are still individuals, right? They're still unique. They each have their own temperament. They each have their individual needs. So there is no one-size-fits-all strategy. So I'm going to try to get in a lot of strategies here so that you can have a clear understanding and hopefully a little toolkit of ideas as you're working with young dual language learners. So first, let's take a little pre-quiz. It'll be easy, true or false. Babies' brains are wired to learn any language in the world, true or false? Feel free to put it in the chat. I can't see the chat. But so that is absolutely true. Babies are linguistic geniuses. A baby's brain is primed to learn any language in the world because babies are born with millions of neurons, billions of neurons, including millions of neurons that will control language in the brain. And in the first few years of life, the neurons connect with other cells to form complex pathways, right? So it's building the brain structure. And so as baby hears people speak certain languages, the brain strengthens certain neuronal connections. If a baby doesn't hear a particular language, or maybe for instance, a baby is perhaps exposed to a certain language early on, but then it isn't maintained, those neuronal branches within the brain will be pruned away. So similarly to pruning a rose bush, right? To make room for other growth. The brain is making room for new knowledge and getting rid of areas that it's not going to need, or it thinks it's not going to need. So this is why when we try to learn a foreign language as adults, we have a hard time with different sounds. So if the sounds don't, for instance, if we're English speakers, if the sounds don't fit into the English language, we have a really hard time with those sounds because our brains are wired to only make those sounds, right? For example, people who speak Japanese as children, they often have a hard time making the sound, and then they grow and they get older and speak English. The sound of L is a lot harder because in Japanese, they don't have that sound in their alphabet. They don't need to make that sound. So that's why you'll notice it's just much harder as an adult to learn language. Number 2, true or false, it is harder for children to develop language when they are exposed to multiple languages at a time. This one is a tricky one. And this one is false. So, and it is a tricky one because children, and we'll talk about the phases of acquiring language, but they go through an observational or quiet stage where they may not speak very much. And so it sometimes feels to parents and caregivers that they're confused or they're struggling, but really children are just thinking, right? They're organizing information in their brain so that they can use it later, right? And it may just take a little bit more time, but because children may take their time, that doesn't mean that they're struggling. And in fact, and this is why I have this graphic up here, people who are dual language learners or learn multiple languages, they have a better time using logic and developing strong thinking skills. And this is exactly why. It's because they are better at categorizing information in their brains. And the third quiz question, bilingual children show an improved executive function of the brain, which means that they are able to shift attention, switch between tasks, and solve problems more easily. And I gave it away a little bit when I pointed out this image, but yes, children have a much easier time with executive function. And additional overall cognition for children learning multiple language is improved, and FYI, the risk of Alzheimer's is lower for people who speak multiple languages. It's an interesting fact. So let's talk a little bit about the 2 ways that children learn language. The first one is called simultaneous language acquisition, and this is when children are exposed to 2 languages at once. And that it's okay if they're in different contexts. So for instance, they may in preschool be only exposed to English, and at home they're only exposed to Spanish, right? So they're getting exposed to 2 languages, but they're simultaneously learning them both.
Let's start by exploring 2 common paths children travel as they acquire a second language. Children on the simultaneous path are learning 2 or more languages within the same span of time. For example, Daniel comes from a home where he has consistently experienced both Chinese and English.
Can you say in Chinese? E?
Simultaneous learners go through the same developmental stages as children learning one language, but often develop a blended vocabulary of words from each language. Yet the language the child is most fluent in is not always obvious.
You can't make assumptions that just because the child comes from a Spanish-speaking home, for instance, that they're not necessarily fluent in English.
My family's names are...
You have to be able to see the child in different contexts with different speakers to see if they understand the full range and extent of both the home language and the English language.
Children on the simultaneous path will continue to develop both languages as long as they have consistent experience and encouragement in each.
Very good.
Alrighty, and I'm showing these videos because I really want to see this in action, right? So where exactly is this happening in children's lives? So that's why, and these videos are, it's nice to see these cuties too in action. So let's look at the second way that children acquire language, which is called successive language acquisition, which means that children maybe grow up with a language or are only exposed to one language, and then they maybe come into a classroom and have to start learning a second language. So they're fluent in one language and then they need to start learning a second language. Successive language is how we as adults learn a new language, right? Because we have this foundation of English, most of us, or our native language. And then we have to layer another language on top. It comes after, right? So, and additionally, we're going to talk a little bit about the 4 stages of language acquisition in this little bit.
The second common path is successive language acquisition. Children on this path arrive at preschool communicating primarily in their home language. They know quite a bit about how language works. They just don't know how English works. When they need to communicate with others, they will use their home language. If they're in a program where their home language is not understood, they often observe and listen rather than speak. In this second stage, children listen.
Oh, sorry about that.
If they're in a program where their home language is not understood, they often observe and listen rather than speak. In this second stage, children listen with intent as they begin to comprehend the new language. While at preschool, they may not talk much during this stage, but they do respond non-verbally to simple English phrases.
And I just want to point out right here as you're watching this video, this teacher asked this child, say thank you. Is that an unreasonable expectation for us as preschool teachers? Isn't it part of our job to encourage social skills, right? But see what this teacher is doing, and she's actually really quite respectful about it, is she is offering an opportunity for him to speak English, and he's not ready, right? He's in this observational and listening stage, and when he's ready, he will move to the next stage. But we don't want to push children, right? So we need to also honor when they're in this silent period, because it's just as if you or I were learning a new language. You don't want to make a mistake and look dumb, right? And neither does a 2 or 3-year-old, right? So that's what's going on for them, right? So she's offering a stage for him to start practicing. He's not quite ready yet, and she's honoring that. So I just want to point out before we watch the rest of this video.
I like it. It was very nice.
And some children may respond in the home language even when addressed in English.
Jennifer, do you like black? Yeah. You like red too?
The third stage is called the telegraphic formulaic stage. Just like sending a message by telegraph, children use a few key words to communicate.
They pick up phrases around the classroom that I call high function words, high kid function words like mine and share.
I share.
It's those kinds of phrases and words that young children first use when they go public with their new language.
In this stage, children effectively communicate by using familiar words and short phrases. They may also use formulaic communication, adding a word to a familiar phrase. For example, the child may combine the language formula wanna with a variety of verbs to express needs and wants. In this stage, children use longer and more complete phrases and sentences.
And at school we go red, yellow, black, red, yellow, black. That's a pattern. Bigger carrot. This is a bigger carrot?
They are learning the finer points of English and practice using language in more complex ways.
All right. Has anybody here ever been bitten by a bug?
Though this first evidence of fluidity doesn't mean complete mastery, you can see they've made a lot of progress.
Yesterday it bit me right here and then 2 and then it got me.
That's a big bite.
Whether on a simultaneous or successive path, all English learners rely on adult assistance.
So hopefully you can sort of see how children move from their home language into a more fluid stage, whether or not it's successive or simultaneous. This is generally the stage or the phases that children go through. And again, some phases are going to take longer than others depending on the child, right? And sometimes, every once in a while, you'll get a child that'll go from the observational stage almost straight to the fluid stage, right? They really want to stay quiet for a long time, and then all of a sudden, please pass the juice. So it really depends on the individual child. So I have a quick little quiz here. I'm going to show you this video, this little guy. And I want you to tell me, is it simultaneous language acquisition or is it successive language acquisition? And well, let's watch it.
Apa yang rusak, Jo?
This one. That one.
Kenapa? Oh, celananya bolong. Kok bisa bolong?
Aku dah chalk kenapa bolong.
Kenapa bolong? Kenapa
Okay.
Papa bolong?
Fix it then. Tiens, tu prépares?
Je peux pas.
Comment ça, tu ne peux pas?
There's no more there.
Tiens, c'est pour toi.
Kalau gitu celananya mau diapain, Jo? Dibuang?
Après, puis dans la poubelle.
Mau taruh di tempat sampah?
No glue.
Belum taruh tempat
Ou
sampah.
alors, on laisse Louise le réparer. Tiens, Louise va enfiler le pantalon. Tu lui tiens le pantalon, elle va l'enfiler.
So what did we see there? We see our little guy. He's responding in both English, Indonesian, and French. Dad is speaking French. Mom is speaking Indonesian. And he's relying on mostly English and French, a little bit of Indonesian, right? And this is called code switching. So it's when you mix languages, and he does it very well. I wish I had known these 3 languages when I was his age. How strong would my brain be right now? And so that sort of gives it away. It's simultaneous. He's learning 3 different languages all at once. And you'll notice he is thinking sometimes about it, about his responses, and he's also just sort of responding in whichever language feels most comfortable to him, right? And again, those are steps that we have to honor for each child. Let's talk about the affective filter. The affective filter is a really key component when anyone is learning any new language. The affective filter is an invisible sort of funnel that lives inside of you as you are acquiring a language. And the filter, if you are in an open, friendly environment where you feel safe, your filter is very open, right? So you can receive lots of information. And even if you may not express it, you're still receiving information. But when children are stressed or they're anxious or they have low self-confidence, or if their temperament is a slow to warm up temperament, their filter is going to narrow, right? And the more narrow a filter is, the less information can get in, right? Because they're going to shut down, right? And some people have a naturally low affective filter, and that means they're confident about learning language and they're okay making mistakes and maybe feeling silly, right? However, not everyone's that lucky, right? So many children have anxiety. They sort of feel nervous about starting a new language. They stammer. And sometimes they can't even utter a peep, right? So this affective filter is something we as educators and parents really need to think about, that we are setting the scene for children to have a very open affective filter. Because without it, or the affective filter, I should say, really can make or break someone's proficiency in a new language. And of course, the way that we do that is by honoring the home language, right? We want children to feel safe and welcome. We're building a community in our classrooms or in our other educational settings, right? We're validating and honoring children's first language in addition to race and abilities and cultures, right? Whatever environment they're coming into, we need to create this culture that says you belong here, right? This environment is for you. So it's key to, in addition to using books, pictures, music, make sure that the classroom reflects children's specific backgrounds. So I know when I first started as a teacher, I love to rely on the teacher published resources from the local teacher store, right? And I realized they were nice resources, they were nice and glossy pictures, but those weren't the children in my classroom. So I started taking pictures of children in my classroom, and they became the reflection, right? So they weren't seeing other people, they were seeing themselves and their families in the classroom. And it's a much more authentic and respectful way, in my opinion, to approach children's culture and children's lives. Additionally, you want to learn key phrases in the child's home language, right? Every attempt that you make to validate children's home language helps them see their own language in a positive, right? In a positive way. Which is exactly how my own grandmother that's the experience she didn't have, right? And children don't have to have that experience anymore. We want to provide opportunities for families to share their language with us. And this is especially important I've worked with some schools in San Francisco that have up to 9, 10, 11 different languages in one classroom, right? And so what I did as a teacher, and what I encourage teachers to do, is to just keep a little list posted right above the teacher counter. Just everyone has a teacher counter, don't they? Of common everyday words. And this one has polite words that this image does, but you're going to want words like mine, or toilet, or hungry, or tired, right? These common early words, so that you can translate them, help the child translate if they get stuck, right? Especially if you are new to the language. And then, of course, we want to invite families into the classroom. They are a key resource. They can help you understand their customs, language, culture. I think most teachers find relationships they develop with families very rewarding, right? And remember, you as the teacher, you have the power. So you have to model for them that it's so important to you that they share their language. Because I will still work with families who kind of say, oh no, I only want my child to speak English. And we really have to help families understand, guess what? There's a place for both languages in this classroom, and there's a benefit to both languages, and I'm going to support that, right? And additionally, you get to continuously share information with families and create a relationship with them, which is key. And of course, creating trust and connecting with children, right? We want to greet children and families warmly each day. If we can make a connection with them culturally, this only furthers model our own vulnerability, right? So let's say we're greeting them in their home language, and maybe we say it imperfectly, right? So it shows the child and the parent, it's okay if you try to speak English in front of me and say it imperfectly, because we're learning together. The schedule is predictable and consistent. And here I have a little picture of a pictograph of the daily schedule. And this one I found online, but I really encourage the pictographs of daily schedule to have pictures of your actual classroom or educational setting to really help children understand, right? Because this, when you have these, although they're pretty and they're glossy and the pictures are cute, they really don't show the children exactly what's happening, right? And children will be able to really see how the day flows. And of course, you're providing support and practice and encouragement for children to feel safe to begin to use a new language, right? Which is a tough thing for them, for most children and people to do. So let's look and see how one teacher supports her dual language learners in the early childhood classroom, especially now that you have a good understanding of how children acquire language, the importance of the affective filter. Let's see how this actually looks in action when it comes to children learning content.
I do believe that the most important aspect of working with English language learners is to build a relationship with them, even though you don't speak the same language. You have yellow on your shirt. Deanna has yellow on her shirt too. We have different techniques that help children understand what's happening, using lots of visuals and picture cues so that they know what's coming next and so that they can learn the routine. Lots of gestures, slower rate of speech so that they understand the meaning of what you're trying to communicate, to be playful and to play games where we'd be using their bodies and at the same time coupling that with language, like finger plays and songs where you're touching the parts of their body that we're teaching them the labels for. If they still don't understand what's happening, then of course you want to provide support in their native language. What do we use to see? ¿Qué usamos para ver? ¿Los qué?
Los sentidos.
Los eyes. So in the large group, they're receiving the models of their English speakers. To stand for orange and black. Alexander has black on his shirt. In a small group, I would work on targeted vocabulary or targeted sounds that they might need to know or know how to make in order to understand English. And also encouraging them to play together in the dramatic play area. That's another area that really helps them to build their language and build their friendships. As the year progresses, English language learners become comfortable with the routine. They become comfortable with me, with their friends that speak a different language, and they start to take risks, and they will use more English language. What's going to be on the next page? A yellow duck. Because they know that you're going to listen and you're going to try to support them to communicate.
And I love that she brought up this idea that children are risking, right? We've been talking about this. And in order for children to risk, here are some tips. We want a low anxiety interactional classroom where communication is emphasized in a variety of ways, right? So we're being patient, making gestures, manipulatives, modeling, and reminding ourselves as early educators that slowing down is not dumbing down, right? I'd like to just show you really quickly, give you a little example of what I do when I'm working with new teachers. And for instance, in the circle time area, let's pretend I'm reading Oonga Boonga, right? So let's say if I was just gonna read it, I might say, her father tried, he rocked her gently in his arms and whispered softly in her ear, but that didn't help. Louise kept on crying until her wails shook the pictures off the walls. Was that exciting? No. Did I read it? Yeah, I read it, right? And there's pictures, right? So, but here's how I would read it with dual language learners. And even if they're not dual language learners, right? I would say, her father tried. He rocked her gently in his arms and he whispered softly in her ear, but that didn't help. Louise kept on crying until her wails, her cries, shook the pictures off the walls. Boom, boom, boom. Right? Do you see a difference? Do you see the gestures, the modeling, right? And I'm also translating those upper tier words like wailing, right? They don't know what wailing is, right? Wailing is like crying. And in a way, you're just giving them more clear information, right? And it does take some prep, but it is worth it. And again, dual language learners aren't the only ones to benefit. All children benefit from that sort of clarified communication when they're in the early childhood setting. So additionally, I want to show you this total body movement experience that another teacher is using. So let's watch her really quickly.
Oh, okay. Okay, time to put the book back. Okay,
My name is Carmen Yang. I'm the preschool teacher in Kaiming Head Start Sunset Center.
Everybody do your share.
We have 85% of children come from Asian family. Most of the family don't speak English at home. So the children come here to learn English.
Have something sounds like oink, oink, oink. Hey.
We read the book, Silly Study. So first we introduce what's this story about. So I introduced the name of the animal like pig, dog, loon, and sheep. So we use stuffed animal to emphasize that.
I also have something. It sounds like woof, woof, woof. What's that? A dog.
We will focus on the vocabulary we want the children to learn. So we will repeat it and emphasize that.
And let's see what do I have. Oh, right here. Silly.
We use the book also to introduce different kind of work about movement.
You know what silly means? What's silly mean?
It means you're being funny.
It's very funny. Can you guys make a silly face? A very silly face.
I use TPR, total physical response. This helps the children when they do the movement, so they can have hand-on experience when they learn a new vocabulary.
Silly Sally went to town, walking backward, upside down. So on the way, she met a pig, and they danced a jig.
Because she's a dancer.
Because she's the dancer, maybe.
We encourage them to make prediction. We ask them to guess what will be happen next and what do they see. So let them involve to the story.
See, what guess next? What's next?
She met a dog.
She met a dog. What the dog? What the dog? What did she do with the dog? They play leapfrog.
We read the book with all the different kind of movement. So when we talk about the movement, for example, like leapfrog, when we would do the movement in front of the children. Many children don't know the English word, so we use the prop so they can see the picture. We have the word in English and in Chinese. So when they see the picture and the word together, so it helps them to remember.
When she met the pig, what the pig does? Dance a jig. This is dance a jig. Dance a jig. Dance a jig.
This helps the children that when they do the movement, so they can have hand-on experience when they learn a new vocabulary.
Now, what this guy doing?
Brooks walking backward upside down.
Upside down. Can you do this movement? Can you walk backward and upside down? Backward.
It's one of the strategies to help us, to help people to learn second language. So when they hear the word and we do the movement at the same time, we understand that movement is the word we have just spoken.
And the next one is what the little dog does. Leapfrog. Leapfrog. Let's do leapfrog. Jump over this cushion. Let's jump over that. Okay, you want to try it first? Jump over.
Day by day, they make a connection of that word is describing that movement.
Yes. Okay.
They really enjoy mixing the movement and spoken language.
Aren't those great props, right? It does require some prep, but it's so worth it, right? To really see children understanding, especially children who are a little bit more timid, and they need to feel really safe. They may not be ready to speak, but they may be ready to play, right? To physically play, which is key. Oops, sorry. Something that's also happening in this silent period, and it's key for quality educators to remember, is that we want to provide information talk to children during the silent period. It's easy to sort of ignore them because they're quiet, right? So, and as teachers, we sometimes can focus on those children who are not so quiet, right? But we want to make sure that when children are in their silent period, we're providing them with a lot of information talk. And I also call this sports announcing, right? Because when you're watching a baseball game, someone is always announcing, right? He's running, he gets to third, the ball flies past into the outfield, right? Somebody's just describing the scene. And that is exactly what information talk is. You're simply describing the scene for the child and his or her participation in the scene, right? So let's see how this actually looks in action. And I have to apologize ahead of time. This is a very, very, very old film. It is from the 80s. So I recognize toys in this film that I played with when I was a little girl. But I really never found another clip that really shows you the strategies that teachers are doing in this clip. So bear with the 80s hair, and let's have a look.
Doing or seeing. It's like being a broadcaster, watching the action and describing it to your listener. Let's watch Dia with Jessie.
Oscar the Grouch is in the garbage can. I wonder where he went. Oh, Ernie's going in the store. He climbed up the steps, up. There he comes down again. And he closed the door. Ooh, it's tight. It's hard to close that door.
Did you notice that Dia is talking, not putting pressure on Jessie to talk? You might wonder how this is helping Jessie to learn language. It's important to know that a big part of learning language is hearing words, how they sound, and figuring out what they mean. For example, as Jessie plays with Oscar the Grouch, going up, 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 she can see what up means.
Matt's using the nail and he's poking some holes.
Here, Sherry is talking with Matt, saying the words for what he's doing, not expecting or demanding a response.
Now you're picking up a straw. And a straw fits. Poke it in. Looking at the hole, poking it bigger.
Did you notice how Sherry accepts Matt's silence, letting him know that he doesn't have to say anything to have her continued attention? Matt has the opportunity to connect what he sees, what he's thinking about, and what he's touching with the words he's hearing. Sherry is using Matt's play to help him learn language. Now Nancy describes the activities of 3 children as they play with containers and cornmeal. Notice how Nancy watches each child to see what he or she is doing and then describes the action.
Put a cup under the bottle. See what happens. Putting cornmeal in the top and holding the cup on the bottom.
I will.
And cornmeal went in the cup. Now Jim's going to try it. You're all working together. Jim wants to turn to try it by himself, too. Did it fill the cup? Almost. It's half full. Now it's 3/4 full.
So we really liked our puffy sleeves back then, didn't we? But see, you can see here, and I've just never, if anyone knows of a resource that is more updated, please let me know. But I've never seen a resource that really shows teachers sort of in this light, providing information, talking. You'll notice the children in this video actually aren't dual language learners. The first child has a speech impairment, and the second child is a toddler, so he's still having a lot of receptive English, thrown at him, or receptive English, but he's not able yet to express it. And in this last scene, we see the teacher giving children vocabulary, right? 3/4 full, half full, right? Giving them the words as they're interacting. And they don't need to do anything for the language. They just get to listen and play, right? And isn't that a gift? So I think that was our last video.
Doing or seeing.
And these are just reminders of a quick list of, as we're working with dual language learners, we're empathetic and encouraging, right? And we're validating their ideas so that their affective filter doesn't narrow. We want them to feel safe to take risks. We're remembering about pacing, which means preparation. of our own explanations and presentations. We're repeating and reviewing key concepts. So the way we saw that teacher reading the book, and then they actually took that to the block area or the rug area and made a game out of it, right? They actually acted it out, but you can take that to other areas of the classroom, the art area, or even outside. And teachers, you're frequently checking in on children, especially those quiet children during the silent period, right? You're just making sure that they are getting the content and their affective filters open enough so that they're open to listening, even if they're not ready to yet speak. And one of the hints here is something we won't have time to explore here, but it's helping children find buddies. Buddies are key for dual language learners, especially in K-3 setting or elementary setting, because they can sort of help transition a monolingual non-English speaker into a new language, right? They can model for them. They provide some scaffolding, right, for that child who may be struggling with a new language. And sometimes you can sort of pair children up, and it's a little easier in K-12 setting because you can sort of put desks together or have them do projects together. In preschool, you have to be a little more strategic. You need to set up an activity that you know they're both gonna like, right? So you can create a connection and create a friendship, right? And have a child who can be a buddy to another child. Just one caveat: we want to make sure we're not asking the buddy too much, right? So that person, that young child who is translating or maybe supporting their friend, we don't want it to be a burden to them, right? We don't want it to infringe on their own learning. So we just have to keep an eye out, but it generally doesn't. It generally helps both children to model and to have someone model for them. And then, of course, being encouraging and supporting, practicing language yourself and feeling silly and not saying it right, and that's okay, because we're all learning together. So I don't have the chat open. Let me see if I can. I don't think I can open it.